Adrenochrom, 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemasonry, and CIA mind control. Now, I understand your initial skepticism. These topics often get dismissed as mere conspiracy theories. But rest assured, what you're about to see is a meticulously researched presentation that sticks to facts. No wild speculation, no unfounded claims. This is a serious investigation, and we're going to see names, dates, declassified records, and research papers which proves this connection between Adrenochrom, Freemasonry, and MK Ultra beyond any shadow of doubt to even the most skeptical. Dr. Ernst Albert Hermann Friedheim is credited with saving millions of lives with his cancer and tropical disease research. Perhaps lesser known is his role in the discovery of adrenochrom. In 1933, Dr. Friedheim found that the respiration of rabbits' red blood cells increased by 50% after adding of a red compound obtained by oxidizing adrenaline. This red compound that he created by mixing adrenaline with silver oxide is perhaps the first documented experiment with adrenochrom, just not by name. His study states there was a very real and measurable physiological reaction when an animal was given adrenochrom. The name adrenochrom translates to color of the adrenal, explained by Friedheim's description of the red compound created from adrenaline. The word adrenochrom was coined as early as March of 1937 by David Ezra Green and Derek Richter from the Biochemical Laboratory at Cambridge. The paper states, adrenaline induces a vigorous oxygen uptake when added in low concentrations due to the formation of a red-colored oxidation product, adrenochrom. In a broad sense, it's not so much adrenochrom, but adrenaline, which is special. Before the discovery and isolation of adrenaline, every other known psychedelic in the West was derived from plants. Ibogaine, which comes from the iboga shrub, mescaline, which comes from the peyote cactus, and LSD, which comes from an ergot fungus on rye. Adrenaline marked an incredible milestone of a drug that could be extracted from and given to any other animal with adrenal glands. It was the same universal drug with similar effects across man and animal. So what exactly is adrenochrome? When adrenaline naturally decomposes in the body, it breaks down and produces adrenochrome. When adrenochrome decomposes further, it converts into androleutin and the pigment melanin. In simple terms, the controversial nature of adrenochrome is because of the fact it comes from blood, and therefore serves as a connection between blood magic of the old world and the scientific and secular modern world. But since adrenochrome comes from adrenaline, why doesn't this same controversy apply to adrenaline as well? And what does Freemasonry or MK Ultra have to do with any of this? Citing a paper from 1959 titled A Small Research in Schizophrenia by Drs. Osmond and Hoffer, they describe schizophrenia in very dire terms. Among the ills which afflict mankind today, few are more formidable, more universal, more persistent, more damaging, more mysterious and more elusive than schizophrenia, the shattered mind. The paper also mentions that Kraepelin believed there were glands somewhere in the body, producing poisons which affected the brain, later referred to by Carl Jung in 1909 as toxin X. Again from the research paper, in May 1950, our colleague, Dr. John Smithies, while reading Roussier's book Le Peyote, observed that some cases of acute schizophrenia closely resembled some mescaline experiences. An even more interesting observation was then made. Listening to a recording of a mescaline experience, a man mentioned that when he took large amounts of adrenaline, the outside world became changed. He had colored visions with his eyes shut and feelings of unreality. Based on that, Drs. Osmond and Hoffer wondered if they might be onto a natural mescaline-like compound M substance. So they began to consider the immediate derivatives of adrenaline, which included adrenochrome. During the Second World War, pinkish adrenaline, which had lost its effects, was used during anesthesia. Disturbances, which included hallucinations, occurred when the patient revived. When Osmond and Hoffer mentioned pinkish adrenaline to fellow researchers, they suggested adrenochrome, mentioning it might be related to every known hallucinogen, and provided some of this brilliant red stuff for them to experiment with. By October of 1952, Osmond and Hoffer had tested adrenochrome on themselves, their wives and their colleagues. They experienced subtle changes in thinking, perception and mood. not unlike those seen in early cases, schizophrenia. Perhaps they had found their M substance, or toxin X. In July 1954, they also experimented with adrenolutin, a greeny gold relative of adrenochrome, but found that it was too hard to work with because its effects could last for over a week. Through these studies by Osmond and Hofer, they were able to consistently demonstrate that adrenochrome had hallucinogenic effects in the brain. They also discovered that when subjects were given LSD, there was a corresponding rise in the amount of adrenochrome detected in their blood. Running out of their supply and funding, the 1959 research into schizophrenia ends with, quote, "So far, money to inquire into the workings of the brain, the organ of mind, have been generally meager. Money is readily available for every other organ, but the brain, which as the vehicle of mind makes all else possible, is grievously neglected." Answering that call for funding was the Northern Jurisdiction Supreme Council of 33rd Degree Scottish Rite Freemasonry. In 1934, the Scottish Rite's Sovereign Grand Commander, Melvin M. Johnson, decided to focus on dementia precox research after meeting with the National Association for Mental Health. He assigned Dr. Nolan Don Carpentier Lewis as the field director. This Scottish Rite Dementia Praecox initiative would go on to fund over 200 projects between 1934 and 1975 for around $30 million, adjusted for inflation. Of the many studies funded by Dr. Lewis on behalf of the Scottish Rite, one of particular interest took place in 1953 in the Canadian room of the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, New York. Here is where Dr. Abram Hofer and Dr. Humphrey Osmond presented their first report of their adrenochrome hypothesis. At the time, little was known about the biochemical process related to adrenochrome production within the body. However, it was clear that adrenochrome produced marked changes in subjects similar to LSD, mescaline, and psilocybin. The unstable nature of adrenochrome, however, led to inconsistent results which could make the adrenochrome hypothesis weak to unaware biochemists which failed to reproduce the results or detect adrenochrome in the blood and urine. The animals tested included spiders, fish, pigeons, rats, cats, dogs, monkeys, and humans. The results of testing adrenochrome on various animals was so consistent that, quote, "It can no longer be doubted that adrenochrome is indeed active." Brought together by Scottish Rite funding, Dr. Lewis and Dr. Hofer became colleagues and friends, alongside a Dr. Ewan Cameron, made somewhat infamous from his psychic driving research under the umbrella of then top-secret CIA MK Ultra program. Further evidence of the presence of adrenochrome in MK Ultra research is from a declassified video in which a scientist explains an experimental substance called MER-17 that can neutralize the effects of psychedelics.
And furthermore, we are continuing our experimental work with hallucinogenic drugs such as mescaline, cannabis, adrenochrome, etc.
This video clip is evidence of the fact that the government did in fact consider adrenochrome a psychedelic substance on par with mescaline and LSD. On the bright May morning of May 4th, 1953, British-born writer Aldous Huxley was in his Hollywood home, about to have his first experience with a psychedelic drug, mescaline. More precisely, he drank 4/10 of a gram of mescaline dissolved in half a glass of water, given to him by his new friend, Dr. Humphrey Osmond, associate to Dr. Abram Hofer. Huxley's experience that day changed his perception forever, and along with it, American pop culture would soon follow. This first mescaline trip inspired Huxley to write The Doors of Perception, published in 1954. In the fourth paragraph of The Doors of Perception, Huxley clearly mentions adrenochrome by name, likely hearing it from discussions with his friend Dr. Osmond. Struck by the close similarity in chemical composition between mescaline and adrenaline, further research revealed that lysergic acid, LSD, an extremely potent hallucinogen derived from ergot, has a structural biochemical relationship to the others. Then came the discovery that adrenochrome, which is a product of the decomposition of adrenaline, can produce many of the symptoms observed in mescaline intoxication. What makes adrenochrome unique is that instead of coming from the peyote cactus, mescaline, or a fungus that grows on rye. It comes from the human body itself. Huxley himself points this out. But adrenochrome probably occurs spontaneously in the human body. In other words, each one of us may be capable of manufacturing a chemical, minute doses of which are known to cause profound changes in consciousness. In 1962, the abbreviation of Adrenochrom is mentioned in the book Clockwork Orange, based on the NADSAT language from Anthony Burgess. It's mentioned alongside another NADSAT reference to synthetic mescaline, synth-mesk. This is notable because adrenochrome and mescaline were grouped together by Aldous Huxley's The Doors of Perception. This hints that Burgess was familiar with Huxley's work. In fact, Burgess was more than just familiar with Huxley, he was an avid fan. In a review of Huxley's Island from 1961, Burgess wrote, "In the whole history of world literature, no writer has been better equipped to create images of false and true utopias than Aldous Huxley. Further evidence that a direct connection can be made between The Doors of Perception and Clockwork Orange is explained on the website for the International Anthony Burgess Foundation. The inscription in the copy of Brave New World in the book collection at the International Anthony Burgess Foundation reveals that Burgess became familiar with Aldous Huxley's dystopia in 1938, while he was studying at the University of Manchester. This makes it Burgess's earliest recorded reading of a work of dystopian fiction. Huxley's work would go on to play a pivotal role in the creation of A Clockwork Orange in 1962. Perhaps even more popular than the book, Clockwork Orange was famously adapted by Stanley Kubrick into a feature-length film in 1971. The movie also includes a scene with the word adrenochrome on the wall, this being the first well-known public reference to adrenochrome in movies or TV. At the time, the adrenochrome reference was almost certainly only recognized by a small niche of people that were also familiar with The Doors of Perception. Aldous Huxley's brother Julian also became familiar with Drs. Osmond and Hoffer, collaborating on a 1964 paper titled Schizophrenia as a Genetic Morphism. Another writer related to Hollywood's version of adrenochrome was Terry Southern. Born 1924 in Alvarado, Texas, Terry went on to write for Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove, Saturday Night Live, and the film Easy Rider. Southern's short story, The Blood of a Wig, 1967, was the last in a collection of writings called Red Dirt Marijuana and Other Tastes. The story has a vague nod to adrenochrome as the blood of schizophrenia patients. Listen, man, you ever made red split? You know, the blood of a wig? Well, it's something else, baby, I can tell you that. Red split, man, it's called red split. It's schizo juice. Blood. The blood of a wig. In the story, a man injects himself with the blood of Qin Li, a well-known Chinese poet who is currently being treated in a mental institution. The effects of this schizo juice, aka adrenochrome, are described as sense derangement-wise. It was unlike acid in that it was not a question of the essential I having new insights, but of becoming a different person entirely. The character goes on to describe that not only did the injection allow him to feel what it was like to be insane, it also allowed him to feel Asian. This concept of injecting yourself with red split adrenochrome to somehow experience or otherwise absorb the traits of the donor is another connection to ancient blood magic and rumored powers of the pineal gland, which will over time be attributed to adrenochrome as well. The 1971 book, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas by Hunter S. Thompson injects some more speculation into the mythology of adrenochrome. He writes, "Adrenochrome, you won't need much, just a little tiny taste. That stuff makes pure mescaline seem like ginger beer. You'll go completely crazy if you take too much." "Where'd you get this?" I asked. "You can't buy it." "What kind of monster client have you picked up this time?" "There's only one source for this stuff. The adrenaline glands from a living human body. It's no good if you get it out of a corpse." "I know. He's one of these Satanism freaks. He offered me human blood. Said it would make me higher than I've ever been in my life." This lineage of Hoffer and Osmond in the world of science, to Huxley in academia, to Burgess, Kubrick, and Thompson in Hollywood, is the most direct reference to four specific persistent rumors about adrenochrome. 1. Adrenochrome is a powerful psychedelic. 2. Adrenochrome is better fresh. 3, adrenochrome is better when derived from younger animals. And 4, adrenochrome is associated somehow with the pineal gland. Coincidentally, adrenochrome is the very first item listed in Adam Gottlieb's book, Legal Highs, due to the book listing each drug in alphabetical order. The entire entry is quite short and reads, effects, physical stimulating, feeling of well-being, slight reduction of thought processes. Adrenochrome causes chemically induced schizophrenia. William Gibson is an American-Canadian writer most well known for his transhumanist book, Neuromancer, which has been credited as being a catalyst for the entire subgenre of science fiction now known as cyberpunk. Gibson is also credited with coining the word cyberspace, first using it in a series of short stories compiled as Burning Chrome in 1982. In that collection is a story titled The Winter Market, which has a reference to adrenochrome. That's the trouble with designer drugs, they're too clever. That stuff you're doing has some tricky tail on one of its molecules, keeps you from turning the decomposed adrenaline into adrenochrome. If it didn't, you'd be schizophrenic by now. In 1982, the Sisters of Mercy make an early mention to adrenochrome in their song named after the chemical, with lyrics such as, high tide, wide-eyed, sped on adrenochrome, filled with panic in their eyes rise, dead on adrenochrome. In 1986, Stephen King's It talks of glands that can be tapped, chemicals of fear, and that the fears of children were simpler and more powerful. Damien Hirst, an artist known for his provocative works, sold a painting on May 22, 1992 at Christie's in London, titled Adrenochrome Semicarbazone Sulfonate. Here, 60 years after the discovery of adrenochrome, it had entered the world of fine art. 1998 saw a movie adaptation of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas starring Johnny Depp, Benicio del Toro, and directed by Terry Gilliam. This was perhaps the widest exposure the public had to adrenochrome since Kubrick's adaptation of Clockwork Orange over 3 decades before. By 2016, adrenochrome became dispersed through international culture, being cited on daytime talk shows, a 2017 movie titled Adrenochrome, and a 2020 Bulgarian news report that referred to adrenochrome as a satanic narcotic. In 2021, Bill Maher mentioned adrenochrome on his HBO show Real Time, itself a reference to Jim Caviezel discussing it at a political rally. The following year saw mentions of adrenochrome by name in the television shows The Pentaverate, The Watcher, and The Boys. So here we have a full history and breakdown of adrenochrome. Misunderstood, highly controversial, and criminally understudied chemical, produced naturally in the human body and now at the center of countless works of fiction. The ties between adrenochrome and Scottish Rite Freemasonry began in the 1930s, supplemented in the 1950s through the CIA's MK Ultra, and from there injected into the mainstream of pop culture. Hoffer wrote a retrospective of his thoughts on adrenochrome in a 1994 paper called Schizophrenia, an evolutionary defense against severe stress. In it, Dr. Hoffer, pioneer of adrenochrome research, still maintains adrenochrome and adrenolutin in the blood and brain cause a toxic psychosis called schizophrenia. Toxin excess, as Jung had called it over a century ago. In a surprising twist, Dr. Hoffer also suggests that high levels of adrenochrome could, in fact, be related to the fountain of youth after all. The paper states, there is no overall advantage in having schizophrenia, in being sick. The advantage arises from having some of the genes of schizophrenia which do not express themselves, that is, in the first order, relatives of the patients. Parents, children, and siblings of schizophrenics will have advantages in both physical and intellectual areas. Physical, more youthful in appearance, especially as they age with much less gray hair, fewer attacks of autoimmune diseases, more ability to tolerate pain, more resistance against bacterial infections. There is evidence they get cancer less frequently. Intellectual, more creative in their thinking, and many have become top scientists, artists, writers, and poets. Another surprising claim that LSD might owe its psychomimetic properties to a disturbance of adrenaline metabolism, and that psychedelic experience is a result of the activity from both LSD and adrenochrome. When the body can't make enough adrenochrome, the LSD by itself causes anxiety and tension. Injecting adrenochrome allows the full experience to develop. If you found this video interesting, please remember to like and subscribe, and sign up to be notified when our next video drops. Post your thoughts, questions, and research in the comments below. If you'd like more videos on this topic or others, consider subscribing to the Paranoid American Patreon and purchasing some original comic books, artwork, and merch from paranoidamerican.com. Until next time, remember that total paranoia is total consciousness. Good night.